Namaskar. Today we are going to discuss about the topic public policy. This public policy has many variations and many implementation and analytical parts. Today we are going to discuss role of executive with special reference to bureaucracy. So, legislature, judiciary, non-government organization all have important part in the public policy making and implementation. Today's lecture will be having these important parts. First is introduction, then the executive, then cabinet in policy making, bureaucracy in policy making, then role of bureaucracy. Next is reasons for civil servants' role in policy making, then functions of bureaucracy, and then conclusion, that will be summing up. We start with introduction. There are two channels of policy making, one from the people through their elected representatives in the legislature and the ministry, and other from the administrative officials to their own chiefs. In parliamentary countries, the two channels converge in the more important cases at a common point, the cabinet, which is the hyphen which joins the executive and legislature together. In presidential countries like the USA, the latter channel remains divergent all the way and terminates at the chief executive, that is the president. The two channels, however, are never quite independent of one another. For legislative policy making may be promoted by the administrative agencies, and administrative policy may be influenced and determined by the acts of the legislature. So, these two channels of policy making, that is one of the people and the other is the legislature and the ministry and administrative officials, they all are very important parts in the policy making. An examination of the working of government discloses that policy making actually takes place at different levels, and that each of these levels somewhat different types of policy making goes on. This activities starting in a generalized form at the top becomes increasingly particularized as you proceed down to the lowest level, that is, in other words, in a complex political system. It would not be possible even where it desired to make all the decisions at one point. An examination of the working of government discloses that policy making actually takes place at different levels, and that each of these levels somewhat different types of policy making goes on. This activities starting in a generalized form at the top becomes increasingly particularized as you proceed down to the lowest level, that is, in other words, in a complex political system. It would not be possible even where it desired to make all the decisions at one point. So, we come to the next point, that is the executive. Executive is the important organ of the government of the three organs, that is executive, legislature and judiciary. And today in this study we are going to see what is the executive and what role it plays in policy making, because executive is very important part of the policy formulation and policy implementation. Actually, the main policy implementation which is done by legislature is policy implementation is done by the executive, and executive consists of the political executive and the permanent executive both. Political executive is that executive that is elected by the people, and the permanent executive makes the civil service or the bureaucratic structure of the country. So, both have important parts to play in the policy making and policy implementation. and this we will see in the next points. So, now we come to the executive. The one dimension of the study of policy making attempts to assess the role of the executive. Modern governments everywhere rely on executive leadership both in policy formation and policy implementation. In a parliamentary system, it is the constitutional task of the cabinet to decide the policies which are to be placed before the legislature for its sanction. Within the cabinet, it is said that the power of the Prime Minister in recent times has increased. In the USA, the President's option to exercise legislative initiative is clearly recognized as a fact to stay. The President is the chief legislator rather than a chief executive. Now, here we see that in USA, where there is a presidential form of government, the President is important part of the policy making, although the legislature, the Congress of the USA is the policy maker or policy formulator, but it is guided by the President and his cabinet. In the Indian political system, the executive consists of the President, the Council of Ministers and the machinery of the government, that is the bureaucracy. The President is the head of the state and the central government carries out its functions under his name. Article 74 of the Indian Constitution provides for a Council of Ministers with the Prime Minister as its head to aid and advise the President in the exercise of his functions. Here I would like to quote the example of UK also. In the British system, which is the guide of our own Indian system, it is said that Indian parliamentary system is a copy of the British system, and in Britain the king is the head of the government, head of the state. Although it is not a republic and the king is a hereditary head, he is not elected by the people, it is on the hereditary basis. So, India is somewhat different in its republican form. Now, but the practice of these parliamentary system is quite similar in UK and India. Real executive is the Council of Ministers in parliamentary systems, which is collectively responsible in India to the Lok Sabha, the lower house of the parliament. The Prime Minister is the head of the majority party in parliament and has been normally a member of the lower house. Now we come to the cabinet and policy making. In government, the office holders who are immediate or proximate policy makers are the members of the cabinet. The cabinet is relatively a small body consisting only of the cabinet ministers and the prime minister. Generally speaking, it is the cabinet which shapes the public policy. The cabinet in India acts as a collective body where ministers take an integrated decision. Generally speaking, it meets frequently and acts as the decision making body on broad policy outlines as well as specific matters related to it. It would be worthwhile to analyze the source of power of the cabinet and role of cabinet in policy making. The first source of cabinet power is the rights conferred upon its members by the Constitution. The cabinet decides the policies which are to be placed before the parliament for its approval. Now, this first source of cabinet power is very important source. It is the Constitution itself which gives the power to the cabinet. The second source of cabinet power flows from the principle of unity. The cabinet acts as a collective body where ministers take an integrated decision. The principle of collective responsibility enables the cabinet to expect that its decisions will be implemented as well as defended publicly by the individual ministers. The third source of cabinet power is control. The cabinet is able to control and coordinate the work of the executive through the cabinet secretariat. In India, the cabinet secretariat prepare the agenda for cabinet meetings, take minutes, circulate decisions and follow them up to see that action has been taken in the departments. This third source of cabinet power is also very important because the coordination of the cabinet's decision is also very important, and the cabinet secretariat plays a very important part in this control. They are coordinated by a hierarchy of staff members, and they follow up the decisions and help in the implementation. And finally, the next source is the party system in cabinet government, which enhances the power of the executive leadership, which can control a parliamentary majority. The executive is expected to get legislative support on the policies presented to the parliament by calling on party unity and loyalty. Now we come to the next point, that is public administration or bureaucracy in policy making. Policy making process is complex and there are various actors and agencies which perform their role in making and executing the policies. It is generally assumed that political authorities lay down the policy and the administrative arm of government implements it. Apparently, the main function of public administrator, that is civil servant, is to implement rather than to make policies. However, the public administration has touched new heights in modern democracies. Emergence of the welfare state has added new dimensions to the expansion of administration. The nature of the role of administration in public policy making is changing gradually. This concept of welfare state is a very important concept, and with the advance of democratic concept, the welfare concept also has come in the modern democracies. This welfare state concept goes with the feel that it is duty of the government to see the welfare of the citizens, the welfare of the people of the country, and for their welfare they have to act in different areas of the life of the people. Now, the role of bureaucracy in policy making. The bureaucracy is an administrative organization consisting of a legal body of non-elected employed officials and organized hierarchically in departments in accordance with the rules governing the conditions of their service. In democratic countries, the bureaucracy is an executive branch of the government. Bureaucracy plays its role in policy making in various ways. Its role can be categorized into three broad activities. Now, the bureaucracy also plays a very important role in different types, and now we are going to discuss its role in the three broad activities, or which three broad functions it does at the part of policy making. And these three important parts are information, suggestive and analytical role. Now we come to the informative role of the bureaucracy. The informative role of the bureaucracy comes to the collection of relevant data, information in order to identify the crux of the problem, to determine what type of data is required and how the data acquired can be put to the best use for framing a policy proposal. It can be in any area of the government activity. The second is the suggestive role, to judge the various aspects of the proposed policy and give best advice about the method of implementation of policy and the pitfalls and possible difficulties. It is related to submission of several alternative solutions to a given problem to the political executive. Here I would like to say that the political executive or the cabinet ministers, they are not trained person, they are general people. So these administrative officers have a very important suggestive role in the policy formulation, because they suggest about the shortcomings and the plus points of any given plan. Now the third is the analytical role. Bureaucracy analyzes the pros and cons of the problem that it takes up for policy formulation. It frames and reframes policy proposals, keeping in view its viability, future prospects, resources available, etc. So, the importance of the role of higher civil servants in policy formulation arises from the fact that they are concerned with the ends and not merely the means. It is now widely accepted that the old politics administration dichotomy was an official artificial one, and that the higher civil servants exercise a great deal of influence on policy because of their administrative knowledge, status and closeness to political power. It means that they present and embody the problem of bureaucratic inertia in the face of politically proposed change. Senior administrators are likely to exert tremendous influence on policy in its formative stage through active campaigning, selective interpretation of data, and through their own programs, designs and strategies. Often they are able to change, rearrange and modify the intent of legislative enactments. So, this bureaucracy plays a very important role in the policy making and the information of public policy. Now, we will discuss the reasons for civil servants' role in policy making. Civil servants have different roles to play in policy making, that is, it may be administrative role, knowledge and experience, and their permanent tenure. All these factors affect the role of civil servants in policy making. The administrative role, now we come to the administrative role, and the higher civil servants have a constitutional responsibility to advise on policy options. They are extensively involved in preparing explanatory material for ministerial use on the operation of existing policy. Now, the second one is the knowledge and experience. The civil servants have a near monopoly of the knowledge which they have derived from educational qualifications and direct experience of the operation of public policies, which enable them to argue from positions of great strength about the various implications of policy proposals. And the next is permanent tenure. This is a very plus point at the part of the public policy civil servants, because they have a permanent tenure. Like political executive, that is not permanent, that is temporary and elected for 5 years only, and sometimes it goes before that also. But these civil servants are permanent executive, they have a permanent tenure and they cannot be removed from their post without any logical reason and without rules. So, permanent tenure is a very important portion which gives a civil servants a great position, and this position is strengthened by their permanence in the administrative organization as compared to the frequent rotation of a minister. Now, we come to the functions of senior civil servant in policy making process. In the policy making role, the senior civil servants have very important functions, because these senior civil servants clearly understand the nature and significance of the national goals or mega policies which the nation has set. They should assist the policy makers to avoid ambiguities. They should advise them on importance of adopting policies which can be implemented, and should also consider the technical, economic, administrative and political feasibility of a proposed policy. They should be able to translate the general policy and its objectives into operational targets. It includes analysis of probable costs and benefit of achieving the operational targets. They should adopt a rational approach and use modern management techniques. Public administrators should recognize the political nature of policy making. They should be able to pay special attention to the question of coordination of policies and policy instruments. They should analyze the policy in question in relation to other policy to see if any inconsistencies exist, and examine whether it complements or supplements the other policies to produce better results. So, it is very important that they have to combine the different parts of the policy, they have to analyze the different parts of policy and to give a real report about the operational realities of the plan. And they have to guide the ministers, they have to present all the data, all the probable results of the particular policy and particular way of working. So, it is their duty to do everything in very honest manner, and they have to advise the ministers to do their duties as best. Now, let us summarize about whatever we have discussed in this program on the role of executive in public policy. In the lecture of this public policy part 1, we have discussed the role of executive and importance of executive and bureaucracy in deciding the public policy, in formulation of public policy and implementation of public policy. In the first part, we have gone through the introduction of the topic and then the role of executive. In this, we have seen different types of executives like parliamentary executive and presidential executive, and we have taken the example of US government and Indian government. Even I have discussed the importance of the British system of parliamentary system, because India and Britain have the same parliamentary system where the powers are divided between the dual executive, the real executive and the actual executive, because the president in India plays important role as nominal executive, but the actual powers are exercised by Prime Minister and his cabinet. So, after the executive, we have seen the cabinet and policy making. Again, this cabinet is the main policy formulator, has important role to play, and cabinet plays an important role in policy making. But here we see this cabinet in India, we have taken the example of India, and in India it works as a unit and as a prime minister as its leader. So, this cabinet plays important part in policy making. Next, we saw the role of bureaucracy in policy making. This bureaucracy in India is a permanent executive, and they have different parts at different levels, because bureaucracy plays role in different categories. There is a hierarchical system of bureaucracy in India, and the top level bureaucrats, they are very effective because they are experienced persons, and with their experience they analyze and they formulate and help the ministers to formulate the policies. Then we saw the role of bureaucracy, and this role of bureaucracy is suggestive also and informative also, and they play important role. Then we saw the reasons of the civil servants, their role in policy making, and their permanent character is very important. Their permanent service plays a very important part, and the powers are given by the constitution. Then we saw the functions of the bureaucracy. This bureaucracy has a very important functions, and the reasons for their importance has been very much because they have knowledge and experience, a long experience of their tenure, and the administrative role is also very important. So, they should adopt a rational approach in policy making, and the welfare system, welfare state concept is also they have to see that the people of the country get the better facilities by the public policy making. So, while summing up, I would say that it is clear that the importance of higher civil service in policy making is increasing day by day. The role of administration in policy formulation is twofold. Firstly, the civil service can give shape to stated policies through the exercise of choice and judgment in administering them, and secondly, they engage in policy formulation through their suggestive, analytical and interpretative roles. Indeed, bureaucratic expertise is required by the political executive in reaching policy decisions. The bureaucracy has a fair share in the implementation of public policy in public interest. The complexity and technical nature of public policies have made public administrators in fact the policy makers, and it is felt by each and everyone that nowadays the public policy makers are the civil servants of the countries, and they hold and they control this policy making process by their own impact. Thank you.